Well, Donald Trump has been administering a national intelligence test of Americans since 2011, when he began lying about President Obama's birth certificate. Millions of Americans failed that intelligence test when they believed Donald Trump's lies about President Obama's birth certificate and his lies about how he was investigating President Obama's birth certificate by sending private investigators to Hawaii, which, of course, he never did. He just lied about it in interviews on television where no one ever challenged his claim that his mysterious private investigators were finding out amazing things. Since he began running for president in 2015, Donald Trump has been administering daily national intelligence tests to Americans, and the results have been a devastating demonstration of higher levels of rank stupidity than anyone could have guessed. In 2016, Donald Trump came in first in the Electoral College, but second with voters with only 46% of the vote. Hillary Clinton got 3 million more votes than Donald Trump, which amounted to 48% of the vote. In 2020, Donald Trump came in second in the Electoral College and with voters winning 46.8% of the vote. Joe Biden got 7 million more votes than Donald Trump with 51.3% of the vote. And I know for a fact, through private conversations with Trump voters in both of those elections, that there are Trump voters who simply want lower taxes and or are opposed to abortion, and voting for the Republican presidential candidate is what they've always done. But they know that Donald Trump is a buffoon, a liar, and very likely a criminal. They are Trump voters who are not fooled by Donald Trump and are not voting for Donald Trump personally. They're voting for lower taxes and voting for ultra-conservative Supreme Court justices. But that leaves at least 40% of the electorate who fail every public intelligence test that Donald Trump administers, every one of them, like the one he did today on his social media site. If you believe anything Donald Trump says in this social media post, you have failed today's intelligence test. Donald Trump wrote, "If a president does not have immunity, the opposing party during his/her term in office can extort and blackmail the president by saying that if you don't give us everything we want, we will indict you for things you did while in office, even if everything done was totally legal and appropriate. That would be the end of the presidency in our country as we know it, and is just one of the many traps there would be for a president without presidential immunity. Obama, Bush, and soon Joe Biden would all be in prison. Protect presidential immunity." Donald Trump is pretending that the concept of presidential immunity from criminal prosecution already exists, which is why he says protect presidential immunity, instead of what he really means, which is create presidential immunity. Donald Trump has proudly lived a very coddled life as a rich person since birth, who never missed a meal and never missed a day of being stupid. But as stupid as Donald Trump is, he is not stupid enough to believe everything that Donald Trump says. If Donald Trump thought presidential immunity from criminal prosecution existed while he was president, he would not have been so polite with Vice President Mike Pence in begging him to overturn the presidential election. He would have, by late morning of January 6th, put a bullet in Mike Pence's head, thereby automatically moving up President pro tem of the Senate, who was Chuck Grassley, to preside over the electoral vote count, and Chuck Grassley would have absolutely counted those votes anyway Donald Trump told him to. We know two things about January 6th. Number one, Donald Trump wanted to remain president more than he ever wanted anything in his life. And number two, there were things he would not do to achieve that. Crimes he would not commit, because Donald Trump knew he could not, in fact, according to the law, stand in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody. A day in the life of the Trump White House was full of two things: the actions of a president out of control and the decisions of a president who knew he could not do many of the things that he wanted to do. He knew there was no criminal immunity for his conduct, and he often feared making choices that he believed could help him, but wouldn't look good. And not that they weren't illegal, they just wouldn't look good. And that was enough to stop Donald Trump. On January 3rd, 2021, the final days of what is now his accused criminal conspiracy to overturn the presidential election. Donald Trump led a long meeting in the Oval Office about his plan to install his now criminal co-defendant, Jeffrey Clark, as the acting Attorney General of the United States. During that meeting, senior members of the Justice Department were yelling about how stupid the Trump idea was. They threatened to all resign if Donald Trump persisted in naming Jeffrey Clark the acting Attorney General. And what happened after all the yelling in the Oval Office about Donald Trump's stupid idea? Donald Trump backed down. It was not an illegal idea, but Donald Trump was still afraid to do it because he knew there were limits. Yesterday's Court of Appeals opinion pointed out that we have over 200 years of history of presidents not being criminally prosecuted by the attorneys general of the opposing party after they leave office. All of those presidents knew they could be prosecuted for crimes committed while they were president. Donald Trump was 28 years old in the summer of 1974 when the country got the most vivid lesson in our history of how fully subject to criminal prosecution former presidents are. On September 8th, 1974, 1 month after Richard Nixon in August resigned the presidency in the middle of an ongoing criminal investigation of his administration, he was pardoned by his former vice president, now President Gerald Ford. It was a pardon unlike any other ever issued by a president. It was not a pardon for a specific named crime. It was a pardon for any and all possible crimes Richard Nixon might have committed from the first day of his presidency until the last day of his presidency. A blanket pardon to cover any and all crimes that Richard Nixon committed while president. The issuance of the pardon was much bigger news than the score of the Super Bowl that year. There wasn't a high school kid in America who did not know about that pardon. Donald Trump now wants us to believe that there was one 28-year-old who recently made the big move across the East River, where he grew up in Queens, to a studio apartment in Manhattan on the Upper East Side, who had no idea that the President of the United States pardoned the previous President of the United States. Newsstands were on every corner in New York City in those days, with multiple New York City newspapers on display with their headlines prominently displayed, so that even if you didn't read one of New York City's several daily newspapers in those days, it was impossible for you to miss the news of the day if your eyes were open. Donald Trump was not one of the 28-year-olds in New York City doing drugs that day. He never did drugs. He was never drunk. He walked by this headline all day on September 8th, 1974. Donald Trump has never been a reader, so there's no reason to think that he read the words of the pardon President Ford issued to Richard Nixon. It included this paragraph. It is believed that a trial of Richard Nixon, if it became necessary, could not fairly begin until a year or more has elapsed. In the meantime, the tranquility to which this nation has been restored by the events of recent weeks could be irreparably lost by the prospects of bringing to trial a former president of the United States. The prospects of such trial will cause prolonged and divisive debate over the propriety of exposing to further punishment and degradation a man who has already paid the unprecedented penalty of relinquishing the highest elective office in the United States. President Ford used the word trial 3 times. A trial of Richard Nixon, bringing to trial a former president, the prospects of such trial 3 times. And not one lawyer or law professor in America said, but you can't bring to trial a former president. The Constitution forbids it. The president has immunity from criminal prosecution. Not one person in America believed that or said that, including Duke Law School graduate Richard Nixon. An hour after the pardon was issued, after President Ford issued the pardon to Richard Nixon formally accepted President Ford's pardon, saying, in accepting this pardon, I hope that his compassionate act will contribute to lifting this burden of Watergate from our country. Nixon went on to say, "One thing I can see clearly now is that I was wrong in not acting more decisively and more forthrightly in dealing with Watergate. No words can describe the depth of my regret and pain at the anguish my mistakes over Watergate have caused the nation and the presidency. I know that many fair-minded people believe that my motivations and actions in the Watergate affair were intentionally self-serving and illegal. I now understand how my own mistakes and misjudgments have contributed to that belief and seem to support it. This burden is the heaviest one of all to bear. Everyone in America, including Richard Nixon, knew that Richard Nixon was on his way to a criminal trial if President Ford hadn't pardoned him. And now Donald Trump is asking his voters to believe that on that day, in 1974, Donald Trump was the stupidest person in America. Stupid, yes, but not that stupid. He knew. He knew. Donald Trump knew every day of his life since he was 28 years old that the President of the United States does not have criminal immunity for crimes committed while president. Donald Trump has known that for 49 years now. The dysfunctional minds who believe Donald Trump will never know that yesterday's appeals court opinion points out that we actually live in a country where the Attorney General cannot, as Donald Trump would put it, quote, indict you for things you did while in office, even if everything done was totally legal and appropriate. Donald Trump speaks to his followers as if they are completely uneducated children, and his followers are incapable of recognizing that insult when he delivers it to them. The day Richard Nixon resigned the presidency and Gerald Ford took the oath of office, the very first thing President Ford said to the country as president was, "My fellow Americans, our long national nightmare is over." The long national nightmare he was referring to was the 18-month investigation of criminal conduct presided over by President Nixon. The long national nightmare that is Donald Trump is much longer than the Nixon nightmare, and it is ongoing. But now the Federal Court of Appeals has unanimously sent Donald Trump on his way to becoming the first former president of the United States to face not just one criminal trial, but 4 criminal trials. Tonight, no one is having worse nightmares than Donald Trump.
I had a popular commentator 4 weeks ago that I talked to that told me flat out, before they knew any of the contents of the bill, nothing was out at that point, that told me flat out, if you try to move a bill that solves the border crisis during this presidential year, I will do whatever I can to destroy you, because I do not want you to solve this during the presidential election.
That was Oklahoma's right-wing Republican Senator James Lankford on the Senate floor today, describing the rage he has faced from Trump fanatics because he actually tried to fix a problem that Donald Trump says is killing 300,000 Americans a year, which, of course, is a typical Trump lie about the dangers of our southern border. The other thing that Republicans have proved is a lie is the idea that Republicans want to fix the border problems. They negotiated a bipartisan Senate bill that strengthens security at the southern border and is endorsed by the Border Patrol Union, and then Donald Trump ordered Republicans not to vote for the bill they had negotiated because Donald Trump doesn't want the southern border to be fixed on Joe Biden's watch. Our next guest, Senator Jon Tester, said it is shameful that politicians in Washington have once again chosen to play politics with our border and put our national security at risk. Senator Tester is running for re-election in Montana, where a new Republican candidate is entering the race, Congressman Matt Rosendale, who joined the Republican chorus in the House of Representatives saying that they would vote against the Senate bill securing the border if it passed the Senate and came to the House. Every Republican who has announced opposition to the Senate bill has revealed that they have never for a single day of their lives been serious about their exaggerated threats of danger at the southern border or their promises to fix it. It was all a lie. Jon Tester beat Matt Rosendale for that Senate seat once before in 2018. Joining us now is Montana's senior senator, Jon Tester, Democrat running for re-election in the United States Senate. Senator, I saw that email you sent out today. I'm sick of this BS. Looked pretty angry. I can't imagine what it is like to be in that chamber on a day like today, when a negotiated piece of legislation to secure the southern border is in effect blocked by Republicans who were part of the negotiation. I've never seen anything like it. Just never seen it.
Look, Lawrence, you covered it very, very well. People sent me here from Montana to actually fix problems, not to play politics. It's the last thing they want. We got Republicans, we got Democrats, but the fact is we're all Americans. And when I go back home to Montana, I hear from everybody, from families to sheriffs to Border Patrol folks, that we need to fix this border. We need to know who's coming across the border. So the negotiations went on for 4 months. It was a price to get the dollars for Ukraine, and came up with a deal. And look, it wasn't a deal that I written, but I think it's a pretty doggone good deal. I think the deal that Langford and Murphy and Sinema came up with is pretty darn good. It puts more manpower on the border, net technology, changes the asylum rules. It's a good, thoughtful presentation. And we've had folks running all over our state and running all over the country. Well, I've been down at the border. It's horrible. It's terrible. Well, let's fix it. We had an opportunity to fix it today. And the same folks who are talking about what a horrible situation's on the border, and I agree, we need to fix it, voted against fixing it. Why? Because they want it as a campaign issue. When this town becomes more about Democrats and Republicans than it does about the American people, it just shows you how badly broken Congress is. And I will tell you, it is unbelievably ridiculous what transpired today, where James Langford was hung out to dry by his own party. They told him to go out and fix this. He did it, worked in good faith, along with Murphy and Sinema, in good faith, came up with a deal, and they pulled the rug out from under him. It's ridiculous. We had a chance to fix this problem. We saw it in 2013 with a border bill that failed because they pulled the rug out from underneath it. Again in 2018 and now in 2024. This isn't about fixing the problems in this country by some that serve in the Senate. It's about making sure they got issues out there that they can run on and show everything that's dysfunctional about this country. The fact is, I hope the American people understand what's transpired today. What transpired today is political malpractice. These folks could have fixed the problem, and they chose not to because they want to keep it as a political issue.
You are a border state. You're a northern border state. Do people in your state feel threatened by the southern border, or is it their sense of a national purpose that they don't feel specifically threatened by it, but it needs to be solved as a national issue?
Look, I think it's both. I think they want to know who's coming across that border. I think it's incumbent on our national security to know who's coming across that border. The only way you do that is make the investment in manpower and technology. That's why the Border Patrol folks are in favor of this. They understand we need more manpower on that southern border. You combine that with the asylum, and it solves the problem. And Montanans would say, thank you. Thank you for solving this problem. But this very same people who have been down on the southern border saying this is a catastrophe now say, no, we don't want to fix it. And it's just, I got to tell you, it's the epitome of craziness. And we ought to, I don't know what to say. How do you fix this place? It's badly broken, and the American people shouldn't put up with it.
And the members of the House who opposed it were opposing it before they knew a word that was in the bill.
100% correct. It's a little over 300 pages. It's not a hard read, but a person ought to read it. And in that vein, Lawrence, I will tell you, we ought to, at a bare minimum, taken this bill to the floor and debated it, had the opportunity to debate the bill and make changes on the bill, but that wasn't even acceptable. And so you're right. I mean, folks are talking about 5,000 people coming across the border. That's hogwash. That's not in the bill. That is hogwash. They're talking about the fact that Biden can do all these things without the bill. That's hogwash, too. The truth is we need this bill in this country so that we can secure our border, and we should have passed it, or we should at least got on it to debate it today.
Senator Jon Tester, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Appreciate the opportunity, Lawrence. Thank you.
Thank you.